Good morning, YouTube. This is Johnny. Thought I'd make a video. It's a Friday. I suppose this is Friday Reads. Grab my Bible and my trusty little Webster New World Pocket Dictionary. One thing about me is that I cannot spell. As you can tell, I don't know how to pronunciate words, and so I'm always looking up words. Sometimes it'll take me 15 to 20 minutes to find a word to spell. It's terrible. So this is Friday Reads. Here it is 8:41 in the morning here in West Michigan. It is March the 27th. It's a Friday, and yeah, my wife went down the street to babysit our two granddaughters, Josephine and Cora, because the daycare center has been closed due to the pandemic, the plague, the pestilence. Thus far, nobody I know is sick. There's been one case confirmed here in Ottawa County, here in West Michigan, but the hospital where my wife works is ready for the onslaught of the pestilence, so we'll see. So yeah, this morning I haven't written anything in my diary. I got up around 7. My wife was left around 8, and I was on the internet this morning. Bob Dylan has a new song out, so I listened to that. 17-minute song, Murder Most Foul. So, as far as what I got out to read this morning, I'm still reading in the mornings. Bavinck, Wonderful Works of God, Instruction in Christian Religion According to the Reformed Confession. This is translated out of the Dutch by Henry Zinstra. So I've been reading that in the mornings. I'm on chapter 10, The Divine Trinity. So I read that in the mornings. Now I have to be honest that in the mornings I read and I write and I mess with the computer and I talk to my wife, but I do read that along with other Christian books on my desk. As far as what I've been reading, I showed you in my last video was to be read pile. Well, I got kind of distracted because I had been reading this biography on Robert Stone, the American writer, who and yeah, it's called Child of Light, a biography of Robert Stone by Madison Smartt Bell. And as I mentioned, Robert Stone, when he was starting out, well, when he got into a writing program back in, I don't know when it was, back in it might have been in the 50s out in California, Wallace Stegner. It was a writing program that he got involved in, and he became friends. I don't know if you can see that. Over here is him hanging out with Ken Kesey. Ken Kesey, Flower Children, 1979. This is older, but yeah. So they were in this writing program. Ken Kesey, Robert Stone, Larry McMurtry, Joan Dion, and some others. And they became friends. Now, I know maybe some of you out there don't know who Ken Kesey is, but that's part of me being of another generation. I grew up on Ken Kesey, who is famous for his novel, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest by Ken Kesey, and he also wrote Sometime a Great Notion by Ken Kesey. And I'm sure you've heard of that. And as I mentioned in the past, when Ken Kesey and Robert Stone were in this writing program, they lived in this area there called Perry Lane, and it was like a bohemian community. And Ken Kesey was exposed to psychedelics through, he became a volunteer in an experiment using psychedelics for the government. It was like some government experimental program. And he became like a test victim, a test participant. He willingly took involved in this test, and that's how he got into psychedelics, LSD, acid, mind-altering, mind-expanding drugs. And when Perry Lane was torn down, when he was in this writing program with Robert Stone and others, he moved to Honda there in California, and he got into this kind of experimental, psychedelic kind of lifestyle, which was written about by Wolfe's book, The Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test. And this is where he describes these wild parties at La Honda with Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters and the Hells Angels. Talks about this. And I also, this week I got a book that was mentioned in the Robert Stone biography. It was in the footnotes, and I bought this book used, and it's kind of like my Friday reads. It's called It's All a Kind of Magic, the Young Ken Kesey. So this is like a little, just a little biographical sketch of young Kesey. It ends right when he got into the writing program there at Stanford. Around the not La Honda, it says here, was anyway, it ends there on La Honda and it goes into that. So I got that. Also, some people don't realize this is another edition of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. This is a hardback edition. He also wrote called The Demon Box, Ken Kesey. Ken Kesey, a legendary writer, counterculture, folk hero, chief trickster of the 60s, tuned on generation. Now Kesey comes to terms with his own legend as he reveals his fascinating passage from the psychedelic 60s to the contradictory 80s. Assuming the guise of Devlin Debris, to pronounce Debris, Kesey begins with his release from prison, his return to an unusual domestic life, recounts various foreign excursions to Egypt to visit the Sphinx, to China to cover the Beijing Marathon, relates lively stories of farm and family and the voice of his grandmother, a tall tale and narrative prayer. Most potently, Kesey looks at the hard lessons to be found in the deaths of Neal Cassady and John Lennon. So that's Demon Box. Yeah, Ken Kesey, his grandfather, and grandmother, and his father owned this dairy farm up in Eugene, Oregon, and that's where he lived most of his life. Ken Kesey, that's where he's buried. Ken Kesey also wrote this novel, The Sailor Song, and he also wrote with his partner, his friend for 40 years, Ken Babs, The Last Go Round, A Real Westerner. So yeah. So I got this in my Ken Kesey collection. And I also, if you're really into Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters, you know about the bus. They took that trip across the United States to go to the World's Fair. And also Ken Kesey's novel, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, was being performed on Broadway with Kirk Douglas. And they drove out there in the bus. And as you all know, I have this book on the bus, a complete guide to the legendary trip of Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters and the birth of the counterculture. This is by Ken Babs and Perry Miller. Forewords by Hunter S. Thompson and Jerry Garcia. And so there's pictures of the bus. Very famous in American history, counterculture. This is all about the bus and the counterculture in the beginning. Neal Cassady was the driver of the bus. He's very famous for being one of the characters in On the Road with Jack Kerouac. And part of the Beat Generation. And so I also have this book on the bus. It's called The Further Inquiry by Ken Kesey. This is where he shows photos of the journey across the United States. It's because when they went across the United States, they filmed everything, they recorded everything, and they were going to make it into this movie, but it was such a mess, and it was. So it's all, you can see it on the internet, on YouTube, parts of it. And so this is about the journey across the United States in the bus. The Merry Pranksters' 1964 voyage aboard Further is probably the best known adventure of an adventurous decade. Ken Kesey and friends transform an old yellow school bus into a psychedelic schooner wired with sound equipment, cameras, musical instruments, and a fridge full of acid-laced orange juice, and set off on a coast-to-coast trip. All systems turned on, filming and recording everything that happened. Neal Cassady, legendary rapper who had the lead role as Dean Moriarty and Jack Kerouac's On the Road, was at the wheel on this pioneering foray into the new space where so many were soon to follow. The Beatles on their magical mystery tour, The Who with their magic bus, and thousands of VW buses and old milk trucks. Tom Wolfe's best-selling electric Kool-Aid acid test chronicled the journey and boosted Kesey into the stratosphere of notoriety as a psychedelic counterculture hero. The Further Inquiry is Kesey's re-examination of the adventure 25 years later in the form of the trial of Neal Cassady's spirit. a series and meditation on the 60s and on Cassidy, and a unique, elusive, and fascinating all-American figure. Father of us all, as Kinsey once described him, with more than 150 previously unpublished color photos by Ron Hasler Burvett, additional images from Allen Ginsberg's collection, and verbatim transcripts of key episodes, including classic Cassidy's monologues. This is must reading for all those who recognize the bus and the bus trip as one of the central metaphors and reference points of its era. So, if you're into the counterculture, the 60s, Ken Kesey, the Merry Pranksters, LSD, acid, things like that. As you know, I've been reading this book, Divine Rascal on the Trail of LSD's Cosmic Courier, Michael Hollington's head. He's mostly known for his friendship with Timothy Leary. So that's what's on my Friday reads. This is my primary Friday reads. I bought this a couple years ago. It's called Acid Christ, Ken Kesey, LSD, and the Politics of Ecstasy by Mark Christensen. This is what I've been reading the last 2 days. I had read this a couple years ago and I didn't really like it. But then I picked it up again the other day and I've been really enjoying it. It's good. It's a good biography, introduction to Ken Kesey, the Merry Pranksters, that whole time period. And so I've been rereading this. I've read Tom Wolfe, The Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test, many times over the years. As you all know, when I was in high school back in 1968, I got into LSD. I was into psychedelics, mescaline, all kinds of psychedelic drugs. And as I've said in the videos, I always did it by myself. I'd go off in the woods, or I would just go off and with my diary, and I would take books, and I would take, pens and paper, and I just go off and I read and I'd write, and I would just trip out. This is another book that is mentioned in the footnotes here in Child of Light, is this book, Beyond the Wasteland, the American Novel in the 1960s, by Raymond M. Olderman. Also, this book is also mentioned in the footnotes. Is this book, The Eternal Atom and the New World Garden, the central myth in the American novel since 1830. And also, this book is very interesting. It's called Gates of Eden, American Culture in the 60s. As you all know, I'm a student of the 60s, the late 60s, 68. Even though I was never really in the flower movement, I never really got into, when I got into the 60s, it was the end of it. Really, the golden time of the 60s was like 1960 to maybe 1966. Yeah, maybe 63. Of course, you have the beatniks from the 40s and the 50s, William Burroughs, Allen Ginsberg, Gary Snyder, especially Jack Kerouac, which, you know, I have the huge Jack Kerouac collection. He's the one that inspired me to begin writing in my diary. As a writer, I kind of follow spontaneous prose. But I've been primarily reading Acid Christ, Ken Kesey, LSD and the Politics of Ecstasy by Christensen. And you all know about One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And I'm sure you heard of the Sometimes Great Notion by Ken Kesey. And yeah, Robert Stone and Ken Kesey were friends for many, many years. And yeah, that's what I'm reading. I was going to show you. I showed you the bus. Here, the bus. I have a poster of the bus, and I'll show it to you. Just hold on. I have two posters of the bus. One's on my wall, laminated, tacked to the wall in my main study. But I have an extra one that I bought. This is the bus. Further. See, further. This is the bus. This is where Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters went across the United States on, from California to New York City, the World's Fair, and to see One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest playing on Broadway with Kirk Douglas. This is further. And yeah, when I was in Houston, Texas doing my internship, I had read in the newspaper that a fellow had made these posters and to raise money to restore the bus. See what they did, the original bus was parked on Ken Kesey's farm there in Eugene, Oregon, and it rusted out. But they bought another bus because BBC in England was going to do a documentary on the 60s and the flower, oh yeah, what was it called, the Summer of Love. And so Ken Kesey, they got another bus and they painted it exactly like, well, I think exactly like the first one. And that bus was shipped over to England and they did a documentary on Ken Kesey and Merry Pranksters and that whole thing. You can see it on YouTube. So, but they were raising money. And so this guy did this poster. And I bought two of them. And one's on my study wall, and this one I just have an extra copy of it. It's probably worth a lot of money. But how many people are into Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters and that, you know. Also, the Grateful Dead was really involved with Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters. They used to play at their acid test parties back in the 67, 66 there in California. So if you read about the Jerry Garcia and the Grateful Dead, you'll read about the Merry Pranksters, Ken Kesey and the bus. So that's what I'm doing in this morning, you know, writing in my diary, reading still Child of Light, Biography of Robert Stone by Madison, Smartt Bell, and reading Acid Christ, Ken Kesey, LSD and the Politics of Ecstasy by Christensen, and reading this new book I got in the mail. It's A Kind of Magic, The Young Ken Kesey by Dodgson. Looking at Beyond the Wasteland, the American novel in the 1960s. There's a chapter in here on Ken Kesey. I think it's, I forgot what chapter it's on. Yeah, The Grail Night Arrives. Ken Kesey, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. So I hope you had a good week, that you're still all healthy and strong, that you're all doing well. Here we're practicing isolation. I don't go anywhere, so there's no thrift stores open, no libraries, no bookstores. And yeah, so I'm just kind of hunkering down waiting for the tidal wave of the pandemic to flood into Holland, Michigan. Thus far, it's been kind of quiet, but we'll see. So I've been watching BookTube, and I haven't seen anybody who's saying they're sick, or I know you're all practicing isolation and maybe going a little crazy. But anyway, I'll close. I'll download this video. I'll take down all these books down the lower level, except for the ones I'm reading, and I'll write in my diary, and I'll go through the day. And thank you for the comments. Thank you for the new subscribers. And I know this video is kind of hodgepodge, but like I said, I'm the Jack Kerouac. This is spontaneous prose, a spontaneous video. I don't really plan things out. I just sit down and I just do my thing. But I hope that you find all this interesting. And if you got any questions or comments, feel free to ask. Ask me anything. If you want to know more about me or the 60s or something, feel free to ask. So once again, I pray that you're all healthy and that you're all doing well. And until next time, bye.